Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hey there, and welcome to you. It's a Wednesday. Excuse me. It's a Wednesday morning, April 26th, 2023, and as usual, we are inundated with tons of news. I'm going to be hop, skipping, and jumping around here. If I don't get to something you find of interest, let me know. You can always email me here at, what am I? LynnCullenshow@gmail. I guess I am. What the hell do I know? So, guys, this federal trial downtown, the Bowers trial, USA v. Bowers. We've been told that it's going to take potentially 3 months. And I mean, I'm thinking, what? I've already done a rant on that. Everyone knows he did it. What should take 3 months? It's taken 4 years to even get into court. So, just for your information, again, I'm following the trial with the reporting being done by Torsten Ove, who is one of the striking PG reporters writing for the strike paper, the Union Progress. And you can get that at unionprogress.com. Excellent reporting, better than the reporting of scabs at the paper. I just have to underscore that. And he points something out that's just astonishing to me. First of all, this is the third day of the trial. They're trying to find a jury. They haven't found one yet. And it apparently appears that finding jurors is going to be so difficult that seating a jury could well last almost to the end of May. A month to seat a jury. So I guess there is some explanation of why they're saying it would take so long. They're trying to shorten it up a bit, at least Bowers' attorneys are, because they're asking the judge to limit what witnesses and survivors and family members can say to the jury when it comes time to do the victim impact statements that occur as one heads into the penalty phase. And they don't want to, according to the reporting, they think that if, for instance, Dan Legger, who is someone I know and who was grievously injured that day, was not expected to live, but did. He's been attending every day. He will obviously be a prime witness. And they're saying that he shouldn't be able to talk about the impact on his life of that massacre, because it would unduly inflame the jurors' emotions and cause undue prejudice. No, it won't. That's fact. It's not undue if they decide that. It's beyond belief. It is a heinous act that has been committed there. 11 dead. All of their family members and friends traumatized. The Jewish community traumatized. Dan Lager walking around with half his insides out. You wouldn't find a more wondrous human than he. You would not. I say that with, you would not. He's a hospice nurse. What kind of wondrous being do you have to be to willingly work with the dying and to offer them comfort? That's what he's about. Anyway, so that's what's going on thus far. But it's going to take into May, maybe, 2 weeks, 3 weeks into May before they can find a jury. And I must say that in reporting by the New York Times on the day one, this was said, which mirrors something I pointed out, I believe, on Monday. The Times piece says trials for mass shooters are relatively rare, given that these massacres often end with the death of the attacker. And I pointed out that it is astonishing that Bowers survived that day. If he were a black man, he would not have. But he was a white guy. And even though he was shooting at the cops, he shot cops. They didn't kill him. We would have been spared all of this. The one time a police force exercises restraint. God. Okay, so there's that. Hey, somebody help me here. I saw from some source that there was an arrest made or closing down of an establishment in Homestead on the main drag, 8th Avenue. And it said that officers from the State Police Bureau of Liquor Control Enforcement and the Homestead cops seized, name of the place was, I don't know, Benefactors. And they came armed with a search warrant. It's billed as a nightclub. But according to the police, they say it wasn't a nightclub. It was a speakeasy. Now, my astonishment here is I thought speakeasies were a historic artifact. Because I thought a speakeasy was a tavern operating during Prohibition. And so without Prohibition, how could there be speakeasies? But then, as I see, they grabbed the cops grabbed a bunch of liquor there. That I guess in Pennsylvania, given the draconian laws here surrounding liquor sales, that we're sort of in somewhat still Prohibition kind of environment where, you can have a speakeasy in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, I don't know. So I was surprised by that. I didn't realize it. And it must have some standing in criminal law. The speakeasies must still be a thing that can. I thought they were gone. So I'm astonished to hear that there was one right near my house that I did not know of. I would have liked to have been able to visit a speakeasy once. It isn't on my bucket list because I don't have a bucket list, but it seems like a good idea. time travel in that way and get to go to a speakeasy. Oh, God. North Dakota became the 14th state to essentially criminalize almost all abortion. Forget about it. If you don't know you're pregnant within by 6 weeks, even if you've been raped, even if you are a victim of incest, let's imagine that. All right, let's imagine 12-year-old girl impregnated by a family member. It's a rape. It's incest. It's so many crimes you can't even see straight. And then that child would have to know that she was pregnant. Would have to have, and if she didn't, and the 6 weeks ends, then that child would be under this state's law and a ton of other American states would be forced to carry her father's or brother's or uncle's child through to a full forced birth. And she's 12. There's no exclusions for minors. There's no exclusions for rape or incest. And this is the essence of today's GOP. Incredible cruelty. Absolute indifference to the suffering of women and children. The governor, while signing the law, said this reaffirms North Dakota is a pro-life state. Yeah, that's real pro-life. And in keeping with that, you can't make these stories up. This is the United States of America. This is what happens in red states now. I'll give you a name. J.C. Stanton. She's a very young woman. She's 25 years old. She's married. And she better slow down because she's expecting her fourth child. She lives in central Oklahoma. Last month, or 2 months ago, toward the end of her fourth pregnancy, she began feeling ill, heavy bleeding. Her husband rushed her off to the emergency room, where it was determined she had a non-viable molar pregnancy, which is defined thusly: when an embryo has too many chromosomes and can result in the developing tissue becoming cancerous. What would normally be done in this situation is to get that cancerous tissue out of her. Get that mucked up fetus out of her. So the emergency room told her what she had and then said there was nothing they could do for her because of Oklahoma law. So she and her husband traveling all over looking for a hospital that would do a DNC. Which is the treatment for this life-threatening condition. Our doc had told her she was at risk of hemorrhage and even death. but that the hospital simply could not provide treatment because of Republican lawmakers. Isn't that amazing? She was at risk of death. She is informed of that by the doctors and told, even though it's possible to help her, they by law cannot. Over the course of a week, she was transferred to 3 different hospitals. The last hospital said, the best we can do is tell you, just go sit in the parking lot. And if anything else happens, we'll be ready to help you. But we can't touch you unless you are crashing in front of us, or your blood pressure goes so high that you could have a heart attack. This is what Republicans do to medical care, health care for women. And they call it pro-life. God. And this is just one story. After ultimately being unable to get an emergency D&C in Oklahoma, she and her husband drove hours and hours and hours to get care in Kansas. And she's now facing additional surgery to remove more cancerous tissue that was found. Wow. I've heard that medical schools in these states are their OBGYN departments are emptying. So if you have a doctor who's getting a degree in a red state, the odds of that doctor even knowing how to do a DNC are going to be increasingly high. So I see that ventures into numbers and my brain shuts off. That is so bizarre. God. Okay. So now someone who did not get pregnant but was raped, allegedly, is of course E. Jean Carroll, whose trial began yesterday. Her rapist, allegedly, Donald J. Trump. And she takes the stand today, so that should be interesting. We're a brave woman to deal with this. Jesus. That mob boss attorney he's got representing him is just going to rip her to shreds. He might skip out of he might get off that one. I don't know. It's a civil case. It's a lower bar. And we'll see. But, anytime you bring a rape case with not a lot of evidence, 40 years after the fact, it would seem it would be tough. I don't know. Milton, thank you. A speakeasy. Okay. All right. So any establishment that serves liquor without a liquor license. So they didn't have a license, making them a speakeasy. And then he tells me that there's actually a legal speakeasy right near me. But legal speakeasy doesn't even make sense. From the moment you arrive at Commerce Bar in East Liberty, you know you'll be getting the full speakeasy experience. That's because to even access this one, you need to make your way to a back alley behind a popular stretch of restaurants and seek out the door. We could tell you which door, but so it gives you the experience, but they got a license. Well, I never heard of that. That's cool. Okay. Thank you, Milton, as usual. Oh, and you know what? Wait, I digress. So while we're on speakeasies, I might as well do the beer news. There is some beer news, and then I'll get back to, I guess, E. Jean Carroll and trials and rapists amongst us. Turns out, just as an update, you know, the Bud Light brouhaha with Republicans, you know, just firing incredible amounts of bullets into Bud Light cans and cartons. Idiots, just friggin' idiots. Anyway, turns out, though, Anheuser-Busch, which makes it, have placed the vice president of marketing and the head of marketing for its mainstream brands on leave. Those are the two that are credited or blamed with creating this fiasco with the placement on a trans website, Dylan Mulvaney. Incredible. So yeah, I don't know if they're going to be able to come back, but it turns out Anheuser-Busch ain't laughing about it. And listen to part of the statement they put out. Kind of a person learns how to do this. This corporate PR speak. It makes it always makes me angry. But here it is. This is Anheuser-Busch talking about these two being on leave. We have made some adjustments to streamline the structure of our marketing function to reduce layers so that our most senior marketers are more closely connected to every aspect of our brand's activities. These steps will help us maintain focus on the things we do best, brewing great beer for all consumers, while always making a positive impact in our communities and on our country. Oh, God. How do you learn to write that kind of shit? How the hell? What school do you go to? Where? I mean, yeah. When I think of people and corporations that have, truly contributed to my country, have had a positive impact on my country. Yeah, Anheuser-Busch. That'd be right up there. And then there's Miller High Life, which is always my beer, because first of all, it was made in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and it was not that I ever really liked beer or had it, but it also bore my name. My name was Lynn Miller, so it's sort of cool to have beer with your name on it, Miller High Life. Well, it turns out Miller High Life, which has the slogan, the champagne of bottled beers, right? Or the champagne of beers. I thought it was bottled beers. Anyway, guess what happened? European regulators intercepted a bunch of Miller High Life coming into Antwerp. okay, the port, and it was to be exported to Germany, which has much better beer, by the way, than Miller High Life. And the Belgian authorities and the French Committee for the Protection of Champagne ordered that all the cans be emptied and then crushed. And there's actually video of, very serious-minded people with badges overseeing the opening of all these thousands of cans of Miller Lite being dumped into a sink. Because it was calling itself the champagne of beers. That was its mistake. Because the European Union has very strict rules that protect European products, so that you can't. And champagne, they say, it has to come from Champagne. You can't say this is champagne and this is what we're going to do. We'll bring down the force of the law. Apparently the same protection is for Kalamata olive oil and paprika from a certain region in Spain. I don't know. But, whatever. The funny thing about this is they're destroying beer. It's not champagne and never said it was. It's a metaphor, you dolts. I don't know. Okay, so that's the beer news. All right. There's so much. I was reminded. Remember yesterday I was talking about Tucker Carlson's career and how he had been employed at CNN as a guest, as a host of Crossfire. And what I didn't recall is that he was, because they had rotating, that's why I couldn't remember him as Crossfire. I was thinking of a lot of other people, but not him. So there were different people who hosted that show. When Tucker was hosting it, he was the conservative to Paul Begala's liberal. And that is the show. They were doing the show that became pretty famous because Jon Stewart was their guest. And I remember at the time, because I so appreciated what Stewart had done. He's a truth teller. And he's courageous in his truth telling. And you'll recall that he went on Crossfire, right? This was 2004. And he was just flat out disdainful of the show. He said he came on. He took their invitation to come on. He took it not because he was an admirer of the show or because he wanted to sell his book, which in fact he had, but it gave him an opportunity to confront these two and say, some of what he said was right to their faces, it's not so much that your show is bad, it's that it's hurting America. So right there, 20 years ago, he's calling out cable news, CNN at the time, of creating these false, these boxing matches, these sparring, and calling that somehow news, that this is the way we're going to speak to each other in terms of our political discourse. And my God, if you were to look back at that show now compared to what we got going, it was like, practically cordial. According to the account I read, Carlson tried to interrupt Stewart, but Stewart just wouldn't be interrupted. And he went on to say, here's what I want to tell you guys. Stop hurting America. You have a responsibility to the public discourse, and you have failed miserably. Carlson eventually quipped, geez, you're more fun on your show. Just my opinion. And Carlson's retort, after Carlson says that, you're more fun on your show. And Stewart said, you know what's interesting, though? You're as big a dick on your show as you are on mine. Oh, as you are on any show. Yeah. So it wasn't that much. I think it was just a few months later that CNN dropped Carlson. I don't know. But Jon Stewart, yep. He's an impressive guy. Truly. All right. I wanted to... Oh, just one more. A few more Tucker things. I'm sorry. Let me just get the Tucker crap out of the way. It's funny. I mentioned yesterday that Don Lemon had hired a big Hollywood lawyer who's gotten big settlements for Quentin Tarantino and Julia Roberts and Seth Rogen. His name is Brian Friedman. And guess who Tucker Carlson's hired? Same guy. So this Brian Friedman is now going, you would think one of these things would take up a lot of time. He's got both Tucker and Don Lemon and is looking to make, I'm sure anything he gets them, he gets a cut of. Wow. He also represents, and still does, Chris Cuomo, who CNN tossed, and is trying to get $125 million off of CNN for what he calls wrongful termination. So, wow. Also, on the Tucker front, and I think this is the end of it, an interesting little bit. I don't know if I'd mentioned, we did speak of the fact that Rupert Murdoch was engaged to be married again. And then not long after we were informed he was engaged to be married, he called it off. And we were told that one of the reasons he called it off was the woman he was going to marry was too much of a Jesus freak for him. That she was just constantly, everything was sort of about prayer and religion. So how did he get involved with her in the first place? He gets engaged and then he finds out this is a central part of her personality. I don't know. But who's reporting this? Let me see. This is a Huffington Post. I have no idea if this is true or not, but a source says that one of the things that might have led to Tucker's firing was he was getting more and more, making prayer and religion part of his shtick. Oh, God. And he had made a speech, I guess last Friday night, at a Heritage Foundation big event. And his speech was apparently laced with religious overtones. that were too extreme for Murdoch, it says here. During the address, Carlson called abortion child sacrifice. He said Americans were involved in a battle between good and evil and suggested the solution was 10 minutes a day to say a prayer. Ah! That's all he said. I mean, it's stupid. It's silly. It's tame by Tucker standards. But it's the kind of thing that freaks Rupert out. He doesn't like spiritual talk. It says here that Carlson found out he was fired just 10 minutes before you found out. They fired him, and then they put the press release out. And none of the Murdochs had the guts to tell him, so they left a woman do it, Suzanne Scott, who's the chief exec. The woman he was engaged to is a woman named Anne Leslie Smith, a former dental hygienist, who would have been his fifth wife. He called it quits because of her outspoken evangelical views and her thoughts on Tucker Carlson, who she reportedly believed was a messenger from God. Oh, well, that might have pissed off his fiance, thinking Tucker Carlson is a messenger from God. Good God. Oh, these people, these unserious lowlifes with power, with extraordinary power. Damn. So I had read a really good piece on, it brings together the Bud Light silliness and rape. It's about toxic masculinity, what has come to be known as toxic masculinity, which I think we all understand sort of what that is. It is this perverse and perverted idea of what makes a man, and how way too many of boys and men in our culture are really told the wrong stuff about what it is to be manly. And the piece I read is by Pittsburgh writer Brian Broom, who wrote just an astonishing memoir about his life growing up as poor, Black, gay in a small town in Ohio. And the life that sent him off on, and it wasn't a good one. And he eventually pulls himself out, and late, in his 40s or something, gets to college. And I can't remember it all, but a pretty impressive thing. And since that book came out, he's been all over the place. And so he wrote this piece about the backlash that Bud Light suffered in partnering for a second with a trans. And that created, Kid Rock used his gun to shoot up another guy with a baseball bat was, engaged in some tantrum. And that this was, it's all over the internet. And he points out that the fact that something that small, Bud Light, acknowledging the existence of this trans woman, right? That so many men would literally feel threatened because they can't deal with the reality of somebody making a choice like that. But then he goes into how boys are raised. Boys are raised to believe that what we call feminine traits represent a danger that they must avoid. Boys learn very early not to stray into feminine behaviors. Now, this is written by a guy who, as a kid, was gay. He knows of what he speaks because he saw what happened to a boy who exhibited feminine behaviors. And he's saying the lessons that a boy learns root deep in our psyches and stay there forever. And Broom goes on to say this. I think it's just so right on the money, so good. Over a lifetime, the expectations around masculinity are random and often border on the absurd. I once saw a tweet, he says, from a woman who suggested that she has no use for a man who orders dessert because eating sweets was feminine. A recent thread from one of my favorite Instagram accounts asked male followers to name behaviors they'd been told were feminine and thus forbidden from adopting lest they be ridiculed and or bullied. And listen to this list because you understand it and you can add to it. The list includes wearing sandals, using sunscreen, using umbrellas, even putting on a coat in the winter, from what I can tell. Owning a cat. Obviously, the color pink. You can't have that. And Broom says, and this is my favorite, playing a wind instrument. And you know, if you think about it, when's the last time you saw a guy playing a flute in an orchestra? And he said, and many of the men that responded to this talked about the things they were not permitted to do with their bodies, such as crossing their legs at the knee, right? Oh, yeah. Or putting their hands on their hips. All right. This is all true. Think about this. This is nuts. And still, I suppose, has a great deal of sway. Think of how restrictive and crazy this is. And if men believe these things, it is partly because of the warnings they heard at an early age from their friends, their fathers, the culture at large. So this whole Bud Light crazed, nutty reaction to this one trans person getting a Bud Light or something reminds us, Broom says, of how problematic these ideas of masculinity are. And here's where he nails it. If conventional views of manliness, conventional, could be reduced to a recipe, I guess it would be this. 1 part stoicism. Boys don't cry, right? 1 part stoicism, 2 parts anger, 3 parts lust, and 4 parts control over women. And this cocktail can be dangerous. Dangerous to women and children, dangerous to the men who struggle to process emotion, deal with negative feelings in a healthy way, or even express love. Brian Broom goes on. I just want to share a little. This guy is so well done. Men need to move beyond the idea that dominating other humans and engaging in endless emotional barricading is how to show the world that they're masculine. The concept needs a de-gendering. Perhaps to some, masculinity only means that you are self-assured, confident, not easily threatened, and won't be told what to do, what you can't wear, who you can love. But there are literally millions of people who possess these traits regardless of sex or gender identity. If your idea of masculine is just a hatred of anything that someone told you is feminine, then I don't know what to tell you, except that as a human being, you are entitled to the whole human experience, not just part of it. And most of us are complicit and have contributed to this. Seriously. Just by little things, little things you say to a boy that you don't say to a girl. It still goes on. Even people who like to think they're woke or have progressed. Okay. And speaking of trans, my God. So the Republicans' legislature in Montana now, I guess, envious of the attention that the Republican legislators in Tennessee recently had, trying to expel two uppity young black members, have now shut down. I think Susan mentioned this yesterday. The only trans member. You imagine being a trans member of the Montana legislature? Right there. That woman has to be extraordinarily brave. Wow. And she is. And she's very direct. And she said some things that enraged her colleagues. She said that if they voted for one of these bills denying trans people access to medical care, that I think she said, next time you bow your heads in prayer, I hope you see that there's blood on your hands. And it's a strong statement, but there is truth behind it. Because the suicide rate for trans adolescents is huge. Huger for those denied the ability to seek out drugs and or treatment to prevent them from going through puberty in a body they don't want to be in. I know this blows a lot of people's minds, but that's it. And so they won't let her speak. Her mic has been turned off. And what's fascinating to me is she represents no threat to them. There aren't enough Democrats like her but when they have power, you see the authoritarian autocracy, the absolute refusal to tolerate even listening to those that are essentially disenfranchised, and they just disenfranchise them further. But the idea that when the voters elect someone to represent them and send them to a legislative body, that then the members of that legislative chamber can refuse to allow the voters' choice to represent them, is outrageous. It's what happened in Tennessee. It's what's happening now in Montana with her. And look at who Republicans in power target. Uh-huh. Not surprising. And some of her supporters were there the other day, and they apparently started panting from the gallery. And man, the guy who was leading the session set the cops on them in seconds. It made what happened in Tennessee on a physical level look like extraordinarily courteous. They had riot helmets on. They had helmets on and batons, and there were like 7, was it mostly women? That they like practically dragged out. Yeah. Republicans governing. It's quite a sight. Oh, I didn't realize I have a caller. I'm sorry. I didn't hear it the first time. Go ahead. Sorry.
Good morning, Lynn. How are you doing?
Hi. I'm okay.
Hey. The toxic masculinity thing it's bad, especially with men of my generation. I remember when I was a year ago after Will Smith slapped Chris Rock on stage, and I called and talked to you and Susan and said I kind of get why he did it. I don't think I disagree, but I understand. And you guys kind of jumped my shit about that, and understandably so. And then I was talking to my wife about it later on, and she did the same thing you and Susan did. and I, when we have examples, like I grew up with John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Sean Connery as 007.
Yeah,
that's what real men did, and it really spoke poorly of you if you couldn't be like them.
Especially as in the Will Smith case, right? Defending your woman, right? That's the way you would defend your woman.
Yeah,
we were.
And I could see myself doing the same thing.
Sure.
I could see myself doing. I'm 61 years old, and I can still see myself doing that. I think I'd rein myself in. I hope, or my wife, she'd rein me in. That's for sure. But it's very unfortunate. I think we're better than we used to be, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, you know what it is? It's younger, as you said, your generation. When I look at like my son's generation and the generation after him, the teens, the 20s, the 30s, these are guys, at least the ones I know, that are much more comfortable with a lot of these so-called feminine. I mean, it's absurd to them.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
Yeah. They don't have trouble being in a kitchen. They don't have, in that kind of stuff too, the gender stuff of like, oh no, that's a woman's job. You don't do that. That's a man's job. They don't, they really don't, from what I can tell, see it that way. And if somebody were to suggest it, they'd laugh.
But it's also, again, I it's good, but I think we're also, because who we raise our kids to be, who our friends are, and where
you're right.
We are kind of in our own little bubble too. So once you get out, earlier you're talking about Jon Stewart, which was very interesting to me because I had an early conversation with a friend, and we were just talking about we really don't want Biden as our president because he's old, but he's better than the alternative. That's the only reason we're going to vote for him. I mean,
much better.
I mean, it's time for these people to start passing the torch. I mean, Feinstein should have done it a long time ago. At some point, you say, it's time to pass it on and give somebody else an opportunity. But Jon Stewart came up in conversation. She says, me and my friends would vote for him in a heartbeat as president because he cares, he's strong, he's young enough still, his mind is really sharp. And he really cares, and I think people would gravitate to that.
There's no doubt about that. But he doesn't want it. That's the other reason you like him. He doesn't have that level of ego, nor would he, I suspect, subject himself to that.
I get all that, and it's easy for me to say what I'm going to say next. But at some point, somebody should say, "What's your duty to your country?"
No, save us! Save us!
I mean, somebody's got to come in from the outside, and honestly, I think that's what people who gravitated towards Trump. He's an outsider, in a much more ridiculous manner than what we're talking about with Jon Stewart. But he could come in that way. I'm an outsider. I care about you. I've got a track record of caring, but Jon Stewart, if somebody like him, and just say, "Look, man, we really need you. We really need you. Can you just put your life on hold for 4 to 8 years?" I don't know. It's a thought.
Yeah, it's a thought, but don't get too too wedded to it. First of all, I got news for you. He's Jewish. That's a big liability in this country. It'd be our first Jewish president. So we haven't even had a Jewish vice president. Ain't gonna happen. Okay, you. Bye.
All right, and enjoy this wonderful day. I always call you when it's a nice day at it. So have a nice day. That's
nice. You too. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
And we'll end on an obit. I meant to get to this yesterday, but things were, as usual, busy. This is really a remarkable guy who I didn't know much about. Pittsburgh guy. I'm reading from the New York Times obituary on him. Herb Douglas. Long life. Lived to be 101. And he was born in Pittsburgh in 1922. He graduated from Taylor Alderdice High School. And he went to the University of Pittsburgh on a scholarship, a football scholarship. He and one other guy, a guy named Joe Robinson, were Pitt's first African-American players. So he broke the color barrier at the University of Pittsburgh football. And his memories of that time are not pleasant. He talked about it being a very, very hard thing. He says he and Joe Robinson were harassed all the time on campus. We were, you can imagine, called all kinds of derogatory names by students, by players on opposing teams. And then a new coach came in, and he told Herb Douglas, "Listen, forget football. I think your future's in track." So he went to track. And he earned a master's degree in education from Pitt in 1950. All of that already makes him pretty special. But I want to drop back a little bit to when he was 14 years old. And Jesse Owens came to Pittsburgh, and this is after the Olympics, the Berlin Olympics, where Owens had won, of course, 4 gold medals and stuck it to Adolf effing Hitler. And Jesse Owens came home to a racist America and apparently was making appearances, being such a hero. And Herb Douglas's mom brought him to a speech that Jesse Owens was giving at a school. It's not named in Pittsburgh. I think probably the local obit would have. And Herb Douglas remembers this. When Jesse was leaving the auditorium, I was standing near the door. I told him I ran track in junior high and that I did 21 feet 8 inches in the long jump and ran 100 yards in 10.4 and high jump 6 feet. He told me that was better than he did at my age and I should keep up the good work. And he did. And he found himself in the Olympics in London in 1948. And he won. He medaled in the broad jump, or I guess they call it the long jump now. And that was the first Olympics held since the 36 Olympics, where Jesse Owens had startled everybody with his extraordinary, stellar performance. There'd been no Olympics in 1940 or in 1944 because Adolf effing Hitler had plunged the world into war. But he and Jesse Owens ended up becoming friends. So the little boy, or the 14-year-old who first spoke to Jesse Owens, later ends up being a friend to him. Herb Douglas had a very successful career in the corporate world. Oh, we're back to beer and liquor industry. And he often found himself in Chicago, where Owens lived, and they would get together. And Herb Douglas said, we talked every week for 20 years until he died in 1980. And I felt I should do something to memorialize his career. I always tried to emulate him. So Herb Douglas founded the International Amateur Athletic Association, which does this thing benefiting the Jesse Owens Foundation, and they do a lot of good work. And I don't know. He ended up serving on Pitt's board of trustees. So quite a span, 101 years, breaking a lot of barriers and finding great success. And here's a funny little thing at the end. When Douglas won his Olympic medal, the first to be won by a Pittsburgh native, he gave it to his mother. And almost daily, she took it from its place on her living room wall and wore it. When she died in 96, he placed the medal in her coffin. So, there you have it. I thank you very much, and I'll be back tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Have a good one.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.